The little lamb looked harmless to both humans and animals, but it only ate meat, never grass. If you were unlucky enough to be bitten by it, you would turn into a terrifying hybrid of human and sheep. And the mastermind behind it all was the farm owner, Angus. In order to cut costs while selling his sheep at high prices, he used lambs in an illegal genetic engineering program. Their goal was to create a new perfect breed of sheep to sell to international investors for a fortune. To expose Angus's twisted experiments, a couple of clumsy environmental activists, Grant and Experience, sneaked onto the farm. By chance, they saw some researchers transporting an experimental specimen. While they weren't looking, Grant rushed forward and snatched a jar containing the specimen, but the researchers quickly noticed and chased after them. The two hurried to escape. They then found a hidden spot to hide in. By that time, the researchers had already searched nearby, so they had no choice but to keep running. However, the slow-reacting Experience failed to keep up. All the researchers followed Grant instead. In a panic, Grant tripped over a tree branch while running, and the jar with the specimen smashed to pieces. But when he looked up, he saw that the specimen inside had vanished. As Grant searched frantically, the mutated lamb had already climbed onto his back and bit hard into his ear. Grant let out a scream of agony. No matter how much he struggled, the mutated lamb refused to let go. In the end, with no other choice, he had to sacrifice his ear. Little did he know the real horror had only just begun. Grant lay on the ground, barely breathing, while the mutated lamb remained full of energy. Soon, signs of mutation began to appear on Grant. He caught the scent of meat. When he turned his head, he saw a rabbit, and without hesitation, he grabbed it. Meanwhile, the mutated lamb had already arrived at another farm. It let out a chilling bleat. Hearing the sound, a mother sheep quickly came to its side, but to her shock, the lamb bit down hard on her nose. Not long after, the bitten sheep appeared in the middle of the road. Farm worker Tucker saw it and immediately got out of his truck to check. There was a clear bite mark on its nose, but Tucker didn't take it seriously. Instead, he called his companion Henry to help carry it into the pen. However, Henry stared at the sheep with a panicked expression. Henry was actually the younger brother of farm owner Angus. When they were kids, Angus slaughtered Henry's pet lamb, skinned it, and jumped out wearing its bloody fleece to terrify him. From then on, Henry developed an acute fear of sheep. He had stayed away from the farm ever since until their father's sudden death forced him to return to settle the inheritance. Seeing Henry's terrified face, Tucker had no choice but to carry the sheep in by himself. Just then, Experience suddenly appeared behind them with a hunting rifle from the truck, threatening them to hand over her partner Grant. The two men were completely stunned, and the bitten sheep ran off. Clearly, they had no idea about Angus's genetic experiments. Experience lowered the gun and asked them to help find Grant. But just as they were about to leave, they saw white smoke rising from the farmhouse not far away. The three of them rushed over immediately. When they stepped inside, they were greeted by a terrifying sight. Blood splattered everywhere, and the owner of the house was nowhere to be seen. As they searched in panic, the runaway sheep suddenly appeared in the room. It had clearly mutated completely into a monster. The creature lunged at them like a maniac. Fortunately, they managed to dodge into the room behind them, only to discover the house owner's corpse lying inside. The three finally realized how serious the situation was. At the same time, the mutated sheep smashed through the door. Tucker didn't hesitate and shot it dead. Right now, they just wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. But as Experience reached the door, she saw a dense herd of sheep blocking the way. They couldn't tell if these sheep were infected, so they braced themselves and walked toward the truck. Luckily, everything went smoothly except for Henry, whose severe fear of sheep kept him frozen inside the house. Experience then tried to talk him through it. With her patient guidance, Henry finally overcame his fear and made it back to the truck. Tucker was just about to drive away when a sheep suddenly jumped into the driver's seat. Tucker ignored it and stepped on the gas, but not far down the road, the once docile sheep suddenly mutated and attacked him. During the struggle, Tucker was bitten on the right foot. He quickly crawled into the back of the truck, but to their shock, the mutated sheep took control of the steering wheel and drove straight toward a cliff. At the last second, the three jumped out to safety. The mutated sheep and the truck plunged over the edge. Since they no longer had a vehicle, they had no choice but to continue on foot. But they had barely walked any distance when Tucker felt a sharp pain in his right foot. He took off his shoe and was shocked to see that his foot had already turned into a sheep's hoof. Before he could even process what happened, Henry spotted a large group of mutated sheep charging down the hillside toward them. By pure chance, they stumbled into Angus's laboratory. There, Henry finally discovered the disturbing experiments no one knew about. They also ran into his brother Angus and 2 researchers. Henry immediately told Angus about the sheep going crazy, but Angus brushed it off and claimed that no one could stop his experiments. While Tucker wasn't looking, one of the researchers, Dr. Rush, jabbed him with a tranquilizer. Angus quickly snatched the rifle from his hands and kicked Henry and Experience out of the lab. But the moment they stepped outside, the mutated sheep attacked again. With nowhere to run, the 2 hid inside a fenced pen. The sheep quickly surrounded them and tried to break through the fence. Henry was terrified at the sight and accidentally slipped into a pit. Experience jumped in after him to save him. A foul stench hit them instantly. The pit was filled with failed experiments. Luckily, there was a tunnel nearby, so they crawled through it and got out. They reached a warehouse and washed the blood off their clothes. But just as they finished cleaning up, they heard strange noises coming from inside. Curious, they walked in and were startled to see a monster with a sheep's head and a human's body hiding in the shadows. When it heard them, the creature slowly walked toward them. Then, Experience noticed the backpack on its back. It was actually the mutated Grant. But by now, he had completely lost his human consciousness. No matter how much Experience called his name, Grant didn't respond. Sensing danger, Henry quickly dragged Experience out of the warehouse and locked the monster inside. Meanwhile, Dr. Rush was still experimenting on Tucker. As the serum entered his body, and after a painful struggle, Tucker actually turned back into a human. It seemed the medicine worked. Excited, she grabbed the serum and headed out to tell Angus. But the moment she stepped outside, she saw her colleague lying dead, torn apart by mutated sheep. Before she could react, the sheep lunged at her. She ran into the nearby forest. But in her escape, she fell into a swamp. The mutated sheep quickly caught up and she was torn to pieces. At that moment, Angus still had no idea how bad things were. He went ahead with the presentation of his new breed of sheep. The international investors were very impressed. But suddenly the sheep let out a strange bleat. Within seconds, a huge swarm of mutated sheep charged toward the event. The investors' faces turned pale in horror. It was already too late to escape. The sheep poured into the venue like a tsunami. None of them would have imagined that they would meet their end at the jaws of sheep. From a distance, Henry and Experience witnessed the horrific scene, but there was nothing they could do except watch the carnage unfold. Strangely, one mutated sheep stopped in front of Angus and didn't attack. When Angus looked down, he saw that his own hand had turned into a hoof. It turned out that earlier on his way to the presentation, Angus had encountered Grant, who had been bitten by the lamb. At that moment, Grant still had his human mind. Filled with resentment toward Angus's experiments, he bit Angus's hand the moment Angus reached out. Angus realized that he was infected too, but his ambition didn't end there. Instead, he took his experimental result back to the farmhouse. At the same time, housekeeper Mrs. Mack drove by, so Henry, Experience, and Mrs. Mack fled the farm and returned to the farmhouse, narrowly avoiding more sheep. They planned to call the police, but to their shock, the mutated Grant appeared inside the house. Before Henry could react, the monster swatted him away with one blow and pinned him to the ground. In desperation, Experience grabbed a chopstick and stabbed it down hard. The monster actually passed out. Experience said she had struck a pressure point on Grant, making him lose consciousness temporarily. But outside, a massive flock of mutated sheep was charging toward the farmhouse, and the investors who had been bitten were now transforming into sheep-headed human monsters. Realizing the danger, the 3 quickly reinforced the doors and windows. It seemed their only hope was to get help from the outside. But when Henry went into Angus's office to make the call, he found Angus already there, and the phone had been sabotaged. Looking at Angus's mutated right hand, Henry decided he was completely insane, so he turned and left immediately. Meanwhile, downstairs, the number of mutated sheep kept growing. Just when they didn't know what to do, they saw Angus leaving the farmhouse with his mutated sheep. Henry instantly realized that Angus might be planning to fly away in his private plane. To stop him from spreading the virus to the outside world, the 3 had to act. But at that moment, Henry noticed a fresh bite mark on his arm, probably from the earlier fight with the monster. Still, with the situation urgent, he didn't have time to worry. To avoid being attacked by the mutated sheep, Henry forced himself to overcome his fear of sheep and crawled toward Angus, disguised in a sheepkin. The trick worked. The flock ignored him completely, but soon Angus spotted a ram sneaking behind him. Unable to stand it any longer, Henry struck the ram with a deadly blow. He thought this would cause the sheep to attack him, but surprisingly, they ignored him. Looking at the wound on his arm, Henry finally understood. They saw him as one of their own. Meanwhile, Angus reached the plain, but as soon as he started it, planning to take his mutated sheep with him, his body began to transform. By the time Henry arrived, Angus had already turned into a sheep-headed human monster. Without any reason left in him, he lunged straight at Henry. Henry tried to talk to him, but it was useless. Fueled by the virus, Angus was incredibly strong. Henry could only run for his life, but Angus chased him relentlessly. At the last moment, a sheepdog suddenly appeared, barking furiously at the mutated Angus. Driven by his sheep instincts, Angus became hesitant. Just then, the plane started moving on its own, silently rolling toward Angus. The dog saw it and ran out of the way. Unaware of the danger, Angus was sliced to pieces by the spinning propeller. With the threat gone, Tucker, now human again, arrived at the scene with the cure developed by Dr. Rush. Without hesitation, he shoved the antidote into Henry's mouth. After a painful struggle, the virus inside Henry was stopped. But there was still the question of what to do with the remaining mutated sheep. Seeing them constantly farting, Henry got an idea. He lit a lighter and tossed it toward the flock. The result was a massive explosion, a fiery inferno that wiped out nearly all the infected sheep. In the end, they used the remaining cure to treat the survivors, restoring the human sheep hybrids, including a barely recognizable Grant, to their original forms. But just when they thought it was all over, the farm sheepdog let out a bay. It was a chilling hint that the crisis might not be truly over.